AM 1460, the new WXBR. Mike Paiva here with you this morning. Joining us on the program is a man whose career spans 3 decades. He has competed in every major wrestling company in the United States, and he is part of a new film project called Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies. Former ECW and NWA heavyweight champion, the franchise, Shane Douglas. Shane, thank you for joining us on the program this morning. When I first heard of Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies, I was immediately intrigued. Tell me how you got involved with this project.
So I figured after barbed wire and cage matches and broken bones, zombies was the next obvious step. Actually, a college mate of mine, Cody Knotts, we didn't know each other in college. He was a freshman when I was a senior, and he had approached me at a convention here in Pittsburgh, in Monroeville, at the mall where the original Dawn of the Dead with zombies was filmed way back in the 70s. He approached me about this idea, and over the years, I've had dozens of quote-unquote directors and writers approach me with ideas like this. And I thought this was the same thing. He'd come up and introduced himself, that he was from Bethany College, the same as I was, and he had this idea. And I gave him my phone number and my email, figuring I would never hear from him again. And about 6-7 months later, he contacted me, wanted to email me the first treatment. And as I read through it, I saw, the idea at first sounded very campy to me, and almost ridiculous. But as you started reading through it, and you see luminaries what I consider luminaries in my business, like Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Rowdy Roddy Piper, battling. You can see in your mind's eye them battling these zombies, and the hilarity of it, and the absurdity of it, and the fun of it for a wrestling fan that grew up watching Rowdy Roddy Piper and Hacksaw Jim Duggan and the franchise Shane Douglas and the gold medalist, Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle and Matt Hardy, Reby Sky. I mean, it's an absolute who's who of wrestling from multiple generations. And that's where I thought Cody Knotts, the writer and director, had a really good catch on this thing, that he's going to hit all the fan bases, all the wrestling fan bases from all the different generations, and have a hell of a lot of fun doing it.
Now, as you just mentioned, the cast, of course, is a who's who of pro wrestling, including Kurt Angle, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Piper, and Matt Hardy. How was it to see these guys again?
Fantastic. For me especially, Jim and Roddy, that takes me instantly back to being a young, snot-nosed, know-nothing kid in the business, because whenever I was just first breaking into wrestling, these were the guys that were taking wrestling to elevations that had never been seen before, with WrestleMania and the original huge run of WWF. And they were great guys then, they're great guys now. And in our business, there's times we spend too much time with each other, days and weeks and months on end with each other on the road, and you're sick of each other. But then you go for years without seeing some of your friends and guys that you highly respect, like Jim and Roddy and Kurt and others. And, see them on the set. Everybody was extraordinarily professional. And Roddy, of course, with his background in acting, we're all fans of They Live, John Carpenter's They Live. Roddy was, it put me right back in the same place I was as a kid, because here I am on a movie set, never having acted in that kind of a setting before. And here's Roddy Piper, who's done it extraordinarily well, with great critical acclaim in his acting ability, and was able for us to just like as a kid trying to learn wrestling, siphoning off of him. And the same as he was then in teaching us about wrestling, he was on the set teaching us about acting. And, it was like a blast of the past.
We're joined by the franchise Shane Douglas, talking about the movie project Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies. You're a producer and a fight choreographer on the project as well. What does that entail?
Right. Well, that sort of got thrown on me at the last minute. I had proponed for Terry Funk from the inception of my involvement with the project. A, because Terry Funk has done this multiple times, from Tin Pan Alley to Roadhouse and multiple movies like that had really good acclaim in the fight action scenes. Unfortunately, Terry had, some months before the project began, had double knee replacement surgery, and really wasn't capable or able to get out and do it as he would want to do it, as you know, Terry Funk. And so they came to me at the last minute, and what was easy about it, first of all, it was a very demanding job, extraordinarily time-intensive, being on-screen acting talent and then producing and then also choreographing the fight scenes or helping. But with our guys, that was what I loved about the way that Cody Notch approached this. He didn't come to us and say, okay, I want Shane Douglas to do a moonsault, a move that I've never done, and I want Roddy Piper to do a top rope suplex, a move he's never done. He wanted us to be us, and who better to know Shane Douglas than Shane Douglas, Roddy Piper than Roddy Piper. And so really it was pretty much just steering the guys, as to what we needed in that particular scene with the action, fight action scenes with the zombies and the other extras, and just like winding them up and let them be them. So it was actually fairly easy in that respect.
Besides pro wrestlers versus zombies, Shane, what keeps you busy these days?
Oh, God. Aside from being a dad of two boys, 7 or 8 now, he turned 8 in December, my youngest, and 12, my oldest, both are wrestling, and I've started coaching with their team when I'm in town. They wanted me to sign on as a head coach or at least an assistant coach, and of course, our business is quite intensive on the weekends, so I do it as I can, and I'll be doing it again this weekend at Danbridge, Pennsylvania with my sons, and jumping right in the car and jumping on the road to get out to Lancaster for a show. But that's the way I've always loved being. Idle time is not a good thing for me. I get nervous and antsy and start looking for things to do. So as far as professionally, the movie's been keeping me very busy, but I'm also working on another side project. As you know, anybody that's followed my career, I'm not a huge fan of where professional wrestling has gone today. And I'll asterisk and preface by saying that is not a slam to the kids today. These kids today are amazing athletes. I wish I could do a tenth of what they can do physically in the ring. But what saddens me and breaks my heart is that they don't have a Bill Watts type character demanding from them what they need to learn. And I'll give a quick little story, a little anecdote, and I think you can extrapolate from that. We were at Crossfire Wrestling in Tennessee about a year ago, give or take, and I was directing the promo in the back. And we had two very easy generics. One was, hey, this is the franchise Shane Douglas, and I really dig Crossfire Wrestling. And the other one was, it's franchise Shane Douglas, and I'm a huge supporter of Make-A-Wish Foundation Middle Tennessee, an organization that we were working with. And two pretty simple drop-ins. And then we wanted a 60-second generic on each character. Shane Douglas gave me 60 seconds. Joe Blow gave me 60 seconds. And the people that I thought would have the easiest time, the ones that had been to the WWE and had some level of experience, were the ones that had the greatest problem. None of the longest got to 24 seconds before they stopped and said, I don't know what else to say. That tells me intrinsically that these kids don't know their characters. They're just reading off a script or a teleprompter, and they're going out and regurgitating what the agents or the office is telling them to do.
Right.
And you need to be organic with it. The franchise Shane Douglas is not a real person. He's a character that's been played on television for many, many years. But I can talk to you in the third person of the franchise as if he were a real person, what kind of food he likes and dislikes, how he'd vote, what type of women he likes. It was pretty obvious, I think, after you see Franny. But I know that character. I know him intimately well. He's like a twin brother to me. These kids don't know their characters that way. And so when you get into the ring, and it happens almost every single match, where your brain goes off on a fart or a tangent, and you're not quite sure what else to do next. And the basic formulas of the art form that is professional wrestling never fail. And yet these kids haven't learned those basic formulas, or the old time we used to say, tell a story and the psychology of a match. Well, they're not even given time to do the psychology of a match. They're told go out in 4 minutes and that includes introductions and finishes. And so you get a whole lot of acrobatics and a whole lot of punch kick. And to me, that's just dry as hell. I caught myself again back to Crossfire. We had Fit Finley and Al Snow wrestling a match. And I had walked out from the back to go check on something at the soundboard, and I started watching the match. About 10 minutes later, I caught myself like a little kid. I had my elbows up on a speaker and my fists up under my chin, just entranced at this match. It was a fantastic old-school match. I would love to see these kids today put into a situation where they were forced to learn the way we were forced to learn back then, and see what amazing things these kids could deliver if they organically know their character and they go out and organically produce a match as opposed to just regurgitate some moves. And so been my mindset for the last decade or better. I'm talking with some investors that are very interested, and it's past the planning stage and into the active phase. I can't really say much more than that at this point, but my hope is, and not because I'm involved in it, my hope is to see the wrestling business brought back to those of us that are wrestling fans, that aren't sports entertainment fans. I want some product to be out there for those of us that want that athletic-looking side as opposed to the entertainment-looking side.
Shane, you mentioned your boys, age 8 and 12. Are they interested in the business?
It's funny you ask because, being the son of a professional wrestler and one of some note, over the last several decades, both of my sons have gone through the phase and outgrown it. I have a box upstairs. I was just cleaning my son's bedroom the other day. He's got probably 75 to 100 of the action figures, 3 or 4 of the different rings and all the toys. These kids grew up with it, much more so than we did in the sense that when we were kids, we didn't have 75 action figures of Bruno Sammartino and everybody to play with. But my kids, I turned it on one day, and my oldest, as soon as it came on, got up and walked out of the room. Not rudely, just got up, wasn't interested. And my 8-year-old, who was 7 at the time, about 6 months ago, watched for like 3 or 4 minutes and then got up and went and started playing with something else. And they, when they go to the independent shows, they'll watch. I had put in a tape of the 1997 ECW November to Remember from Pittsburgh. I wrestled Bam Bam. Mm-hmm. And I turned the sound down, of course, because I didn't want them to hear the language. But they started watching it, and they were disinterested at first, but about 5 minutes into it, they started getting a look at it. My guess and my belief is that all these millions of kids that grew up with John Cena and The Rock and Steve Austin and everybody since, that those kids would love to see something. Those kids are not going to come back and watch, the stuff that they're being given right now by the big 2 companies. But I think that if you gave them something like we grew up watching, something a little bit edgier, a little more realistic, and a lot more impactful, that those kids would come back in droves. I know my 12-year-old was loving, watching Bam Bam throw his dad around. And, so you've got not only our generation that grew up watching wrestling and want it back, but now you've got this huge population of children out there in that tweener age that have outgrown the sports entertainment product and are looking for something else. My guess is if they're not getting something in that pro wrestling vein, they'll go to the shoot fighting.
Right. We're going to take a little trip down memory lane, Shane. Most wrestling fans remember you for the time you threw down the NWA heavyweight title and proclaimed Eastern Championship Wrestling, Extreme Championship Wrestling. Looking back 20 years ago at this point, is that moment, it's still talked about to this day, but did the NWA officials know that you would be throwing down their belt?
No. To my knowledge, there were 2 people that knew what was going to happen, and 3 that knew the possibility. Todd Gordon, Paul Heyman, and myself. We kept it extremely under wraps. And Paul, to his credit, never dictated to me. He never came to me and said, here's what you're doing, and that's the way it's going to be. He called me earlier in the week, said he had an idea. He ran the idea by me, and he gave me the pros and cons of both sides. He said, if it works, this is what will happen, and this will be the good, and this is going to be the bad. If it doesn't work, this is going to be the good, and this is going to be the bad. Think about it. And I thought about it for the entire week, and I really had reservations. Not so much, my firm belief was and continues to be to this day that the NWA was dead at that point. But I had friends and people that I greatly admired, like the Funk Brothers, the Briscoe Brothers, Ricky Steamboat, a litany of a Harley Race, and just many, many guys that had carried that belt. And my concern was that they would think that I was sort of crapping on their legacy, which was not the intention of that. It was to separate us from the NWA. Mm-hmm. And that was my only concern. And all week long, I dabbled back and forth. I'm going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm not going to do it. The day that I got to the building, of course, Dennis Corluzzo was there, and I was there very early, 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning or afternoon. And Dennis, as soon as I walked into the building, came up to me and shoved a contract in my face that would make me an exclusive NWA talent. Well, I couldn't very well sign that contract. And then afterwards say, well, I didn't really mean it or whatever. And the contract was a binding document. I would never sign any contract, even if I wanted to sign it, until my attorneys had read through it and told me what's good and bad about it. And I said that politely to Dennis, and he continued to harass me the entire day, following me around that building, even waited for me outside the toilet stall when I was going to the bathroom and shoved it in my face. And that was what really pushed it to me, because earlier that week, Mike Paiva, who had the syndicated radio show at the time, called me up and said, "Hey, I had Dennis Corluzzo on last night. Did you listen?" And I said, "No." He said, "You better go back and listen to the archive." So I went back and pulled it up and listened to it. And Dennis, to my knowledge, I'd never met in my life. I know that I'd never worked for him, and I don't recall that I'd ever met him prior to that. And he went on. At this time, ECW was giving me maybe 2 to 4 days a month of business. It wasn't my staple paycheck. It was part of it. And I was greatly relying on my independent matches at that point to put food on the table for my family. And Dennis went on Mike Paiva's show and said, any independent promoter out there thinking of booking Shane Douglas should think twice, because Shane Douglas will no-show you. And in my entire career, I've only no-showed one match, and it embarrassed the hell out of me. It was back in November, I believe, the night that we had the Pro Wrestlers versus Zombies screening in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. I had a match the next day I thought was the next week for Lancaster Championship Wrestling. Just a brain fart. I was so busy with doing the movie thing. And that night I started getting calls, and I was just ultimately embarrassed that I had missed a shot. And that's the only shot I've ever missed. So when years before, 2 decades ago, when Dennis Corluzzo was saying this, it really ticked me off to a guy that I had no idea who he even was. And then I get to that day and he's shoving this contract in my face. And to be quite honest with you, I didn't make the absolute decision to do it until the moment when I look up and say, "Dad, here we go, Dad." Because it was the first time in my life that, as a man, I understood what my dad taught me as a boy and said 1,000 times to me. You can walk with your feet on the ground like everybody else. You can soar with the eagles. And I never knew what he meant by that. And it was like, what the hell is he talking about? And at that split second when I said that, that wasn't a planned comment or whatever. That was me just being me, thinking, knowing my dad being a wrestling fan was watching, and that was when the decision was made.
You bounced around from ECW to the WWF to WCW, then back to ECW. Looking back, do you wish you stuck around in ECW all those years?
Well, I was going from ECW for right under 7 months, and I left at the end, and I left only because I had reached a point where I was owed so much money. I had kept giving Paul the benefit of the doubt, and, he had in the past fallen behind, about 10,000, 12,000, and he'd make it up, and, but now we're getting to 70, 80, 90, 100,000 and over, and at that point I couldn't possibly keep turning down the money that was being offered me by the other companies, and I left, broke my heart to have to leave. ECW was and will always be the home that I always considered my place, and but when the guy that signs the paychecks is not giving you one and reaching that level of money, I know at the time there was a lot of controversy with the fans saying that I was a jackass for doing it, and what an idiot I was for leaving and everything else. And all I would say to those people that believed that then, put themselves in my shoes. When it reached $144,410, I couldn't let it go any higher. And most people I would think would say I was an idiot for letting it go that high. But yeah, my heart has always been in ECW and in that kind of product. And I think that's what the business needs a huge dose of right now.
We're joined by former ECW heavyweight champion, the franchise, Shane Douglas, right here on the new WXBR 1460. He's promoting the movie project Pro Wrestlers versus Zombies. After the birth of your second child, Shane, you reportedly checked yourself into a rehab facility for an addiction to painkillers. How are you dealing with your addiction today, almost 10 years later?
Fantastic. I haven't used anything since December 22nd of 2005.
Great.
I was one of those guys that, basically the poster boy, because if it could happen to me, it can happen to anybody. I'm the guy that never smoked pot in my life. Drugs were never my deal. I don't know if I was afraid of them or too cheap or a combination. To me, if you gave me a six-pack of beer, I was good. I didn't even really like getting drunk. I don't like that feeling. So, but when you're getting to the point where you can't get out of bed in the morning at 35, 36 years old, and your body aches, it takes 45 minutes to get out of bed in the morning, you start looking for something. Because as a professional, you have a mindset as to where your level of performance should be. And I think anybody that's been a star in the business or drawn money in the business has that built-in, I'm going to give them the best attitude. And I certainly did. That was the way I was trained into the business. But it was completely new to me to suddenly not be able to get out of bed in the morning and avoid, doing all the little chores around the house because you were just in so much physical pain. The problem for me was that I never gave myself the opportunity to truly recover from an injury or a surgery. I was at a Super Bowl party a week and a half ago where one of my friends I hadn't seen for nearly 20 years since that time frame. And they started talking about, don't you remember when you had that shoulder surgery and 3 days later you're with sunglasses, you're in the gym benching 225 to get back in shape, and just idiot, crazy stuff that we do. And I would bounce back very quickly, but my body wasn't truly recovered, and then that would inherently lend itself to another injury. And this domino effect just kept going on and on and on. It was insanity. It was just me being insane, me pushing my body to a level it couldn't be pushed to. And then, the next logical step was to be able to continue performing like that, was to have something to help you. And I can still remember vividly the day that I realized that I couldn't stop taking them. And there wasn't one pill that I put in my mouth after that time that I literally didn't want to put a gun barrel right behind it. I was so ashamed of myself and embarrassed, so my heart breaks. I was one of the people that had no sympathy for people that were in that boat before, and now I've had a huge wake-up call as to what that entails. When you hear that somebody's going through withdrawal, or you see Philip Seymour Hoffman. I mean, we're seeing this now attack across the board. It used to be something you saw in the ghettos and the lower economic steps. Now you're seeing it from multi-millionaire, world-famous actors down to the ghetto and everybody in between. To me, the way I dealt with it afterwards was to sort of wrap myself intellectually into it. How in the hell did this happen? And I started doing an awful lot of research on Purdue Pharmaceuticals, which makes OxyContin. Purdue Pharmaceuticals has a drug that is 99.9% pure synthetic heroin. Now, I don't know about up in Boston. Here in Pittsburgh in the last month or two, we've had a lot of people dying overdosing on fentanyl-laced heroin that's called Theraflu or something. And they're saying that it's in the range of 45% pure. So I can't begin to imagine that the brains, the chemists at Purdue Pharmaceuticals didn't know what they were doing. They were creating a drug that was going to guarantee an addicted base that would be back every month and create one hell of a lot of money. To date, I don't think anybody from Purdue Pharmaceuticals has been prosecuted. And yet there's been tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people die. How many more go to jail? Just a horrible scourge of a drug. And I can still remember the words the doctor used when he first prescribed it to me. He said, there's a new drug on the market. It's called OxyContin. It's a miracle drug. And it was. The first pill I took, suddenly I felt like I was 20 years old again. And but when you try to stop, nobody told me that it's synthetic pure heroin. And had anybody even used those terms, I would have never touched the stuff. But it happened, and I think I'm much wiser today, certainly more sympathetic to people in that boat, and very happy and proud to be able to say that I'm, coming up on the 10th year anniversary of being clean next December 22nd. So I've reached a point for me, Mike, where it's no longer anything I think about. I'm not, for me, and each person's individual. Some people believe it's a lifelong addiction, and I'm sure if I took an OxyContin, I'd be right back on that boat again. But I've never, ever had any problem with anything else since, and if I felt that urge, I would run as fast as I could in the other direction. But there are some tremendous programs out there today, and one of the places I'll give Vince McMahon kudos is this program that he has with anybody that's ever worked even for one day for the company. They'll pay to send you to one of these top-notch facilities. And, I say, I applaud that, because anything that steps in the direction of taking this out of the shadows, because it's something that anybody that's in that boat is highly embarrassed about, ashamed of. And so the tendency for any human being when they're ashamed and embarrassed is to hide it. And I would hope that people realizing that they're in that boat, that that's a dangerous situation to be in. Addiction is a highly dangerous, very potentially dangerously lethal situation to be in. To go wherever you have to beg somebody on the street if you need help, but get help because it will kill you, put you in jail, or worse. And so it's I'm thankful for it, especially being the father of those two boys. Their dad's still around and capable of coaching them and being in awe of them every day. And I'm thankful that whatever gods there be up there for that.
Once again, we're chatting with former ECW heavyweight champion, the franchise, Shane Douglas. Any idea on a time frame as to when we could see Pro Wrestlers vs. Zombies in theaters?
Yes, my understanding is that the week of WrestleMania, the first week of April, it will be in limited theatrical release around the country. I know in New Orleans for sure. And the last night had a status update. They were looking at other selected cities that they considered wrestling hotbeds around the country. The distributor is a company called Trauma. And it will also be available that week, I believe, for purchase. Now, I'm not sure if it's going to be that exact same week or right up thereabouts, but WrestleMania weekend will kick off the first availability of the movie. And Cody Knotts has a few final things he's shot, and he's been shooting and editing into the movie. Just on the screening, just some minor things that are the purpose of screening, to find out if there's something in the movie not making sense to the audience or whatever. And we came up consistently in our screenings. The one minor detail that was nagging at the viewers, and so he's shot that and be editing it in. And we're excited and sitting back and hoping that the wrestling fans have the same fun watching it that we do.
Shane, I want to thank you for joining us on the program this morning. Any last words for our listeners before I let you go?
No, hey, first of all, thank you to anybody out there that's watched over the years, because you've allowed a kid from New Brighton, Pennsylvania, to live out a fantasy and a dream in his career. If you're a wrestling fan, start to look for and demand wrestling back. If you're a sports entertainment fan, keep watching Vince and keep watching TNA. But if you're like me, wanting something more demanded of them, and if you don't get it from them, look for it somewhere else.
That's the franchise, Shane Douglas. Head on over to franchisefansite.com for more information. We'll step aside for a quick break. More of the program after this.